With Warframe's VALLIS Undermind update, we did receive a new augment for Styanax. This augment is called Tharos Lethality, and it increases your critical damage by 100% on enemies you hit with Tharos Strike, and the damage bonus is doubled for spear guns. Styanax is a weird Warframe because he has a passive that leans into this crit chance. If you have higher shields, you get higher crit chance, so I think that's where the synergy is coming in. We actually did make a Styanax build once, which completely forgoes his fourth ability for a playstyle surrounding this passive, so by all means, you can make a build around this augment. But Tharos Strike is his subsume, and it's one of the better ones in game, and most people would use it on Warframes such as Atlas, or in today's case, Baruuk. Now, not that Baruuk is a Warframe who remotely needs an armor strip at this point. He was already incredibly strong before the recent Exalted Weapon update, but he's even stronger now. And I thought I'd do a bit of investment in him, throw on a bunch of really broken Archon shards, lean into this helmet setup with the augment, and go all out with crit damage. So here's what we're doing. This is a completely overpowered setup. It does not need to be this strong, but Warframe's a power fantasy game, so I can't help myself but overinvest here. First off, I'm choosing to subsume off Harrow's second skill, Lull. Most people wouldn't do this because it's a really good ability at decaying your meter to keep your 4 active, but there's 2 reasons I'm removing this skill. One, his first skill, Elude, is actually pretty good at constantly decaying your meter as long as you give it a few seconds to absorb incoming damage by not putting out any attacks yourself. And it also has an augment, that being Elusive Retribution, which not only gives you attack speed, but also crit damage. This is pretty easy to stack up, and it's also nice because it decays if you don't constantly keep it active, so you won't just lose the buff entirely. As you can imagine, we're already leaning even more so into crit damage across the setup as a whole. Another addition to our crit damage is the use of Tenacious Bond on our companion. As long as you're over the necessary crit chance threshold on your companion weapon, this is going to give you even more crit bonus. And then we are rocking Organ Shatter on our Baruuk's fists. You'll see in the build I'm going with a Sacrificial Steel and Pressure Point setup, just because I like seeing those red crits more, but if you want to, you could go for regular Prime Pressure Point and then Galvanized Steel for even more crit. And then, to go full investment in this stupid setup, I'm going with 5 Talforge Purple Archon Shards, as well as combining this with Prime Flow so we can get over the necessary threshold to get that crit bonus. So we've got a crit bonus from Elusive Retribution, Tenacious Bond, Organ Shatter, all of those Talforge Shards, and the crit damage from the new augment, Tharos Lethality. This build is complete overkill, but it does funny big red numbers. And this is all versus enemies who you are armor stripping with said augment and ability. You do not need this. I want to make this very clear. This build is just fucking dumb. But it also doubles as an opportunity for me to once again vouch for Elusive Retribution, which I've done in the past. I think Lull is just incredibly overrated on Baruuk in terms of keeping that meter. You can do the same thing with Elusive Retribution, but on the fly, and get an amazing buff with it at the same time. There is another choice with the setup worth noting that is of this recent update, and that is that you can now put 2 arcanes, both a primary and secondary, on your arc gun. And what I've done in most builds is use the dexterity arcanes in both these slots. As I don't use arc guns too much, instead of sacrificing a good arcane on my primary or secondary, because I think dexterity is, pretty situational, requires you to melee enemies in order to get that damage buff. So we're not using it for a damage buff at all on the arc guns. We're just using a primary and secondary dexterity arcane to get a large duration on our combo count. This means we don't have to use Naramon, and then I can lean into Madarai. Of course we get the casting speed from Madarai, but there's a little strategy you can do with the power strength bonus, and that's that Baruuk has channels, so he can snapshot this power strength. Snapshotting this power strength buff basically means that once the power strength duration runs out, it won't disappear on the ability you've casted it on. So I give myself that sling strength bonus, then I cast my Elusive Retribution or my 4th ability. They're going to keep those strength bonuses the entire time, unless you run into a nullifier in which you'd have to reset it. And in some of the footage you'll also see that I have a Void Trace buff active due to the relics, giving me even more strength. This can also be snapshotted. Okay, I've done enough yapping and explaining the setup and build. Now to show it all off. You've already seen the shards, you already know about the Madarai, and here is the Baruuk build with Tharos Strike subsumed over Lull, Growing Power and Blind Rage for our strength, Equilibrium and Prime Flow for not only sustainability, but Prime Flow is to make sure those shards are working. Conjure footed so we don't get knocked down. Reactive Storm, it actually isn't a must nowadays, I want to make this clear. I brought this up before on the channel when we did the tier list about the new updates to all the exotic weapons when that update came out. And people were saying that I'm just like smoking crack about this ability being good without Reactive Storm. It fucking is. You can make a good build for his 4 without Reactive Storm, I promise you that. So you don't actually need this in the kit whatsoever. But it's so good, there's no reason not to, if it makes sense. And of course, it's going to do adaptive damage per enemy type, and it gives you a bunch of status chance. Elusive Retribution, and of course the Augment, which is the focus of the day. Stretch is mainly here for the range on our Tharos Lethality. I want to be hitting more enemies with it, so in my opinion, you got to have some range in this build. Then we have Primary Direction and Arcane Aegis for survivability. The reason I'm choosing to lean into this shield setup is because we don't have adaptation, but shields naturally have a bit of damage reduction built in, and then we're stacking damage reduction from our 3rd and 4th skill. So to me it makes sense to combine the two. And then Arcane Fury, also overkill, but just gives you more melee damage, incredibly strong. Due to Reactive Storm, we don't need to build into any other element on this weapon other than electricity to of course proc influence. No shit. Who knows guys, maybe someday in the future we'll see a different meta for melee arcanes, but we're just stuck with this for now. As I said already, Sacrificial Pressure and Sacrificial Still, and then we combine that with Blood Rush and Organ Chatter for our crit setup, Berserker Fury, and a Gladiator Vice for not only more crit but also more attack speed. Then we've got Gladiator Might for even more crit damage. This is optional, you could go with a Smite mod if you want. Discipline's Merit, my personal favourite for Tennokai. The build is really overkill, and I'd mainly recommend using this kind of build if you're using the Augment for the 4. Then on our Nautilus we have Synth Deconstruct to help with those equilibrium drops, and then we've got Tenacious Bond, and then we're combining that with our choice of weapon, which is the Prisma Burst Laser, which is going to get over that crit threshold to give us that crit damage bonus. Then our Arc Gun, as I said, primary, secondary dexterity for that combo duration. I do think it's a bit hilarious how Styanax's new Augment is less useful on him and more useful on other Warframes. Baruuk is by no means the #1 best when it comes to this, but he's probably at the top. And I can't lie, playing him with this build, it really does put into perspective just how strong Baruuk has become since that Exalta rework. He's just impossible to kill, has really good ability sustain, especially when you're using his first skill, which not a lot of people are doing, and his damage is just unfuckable, even without a heavy investment setup like this. Anyway, let me know which Warframes you guys are using Tharos Lethality with. Be sure to check out the previous videos I've dropped on this update, and like and sub if you've enjoyed. If not, then no worries, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Take care.